Hey guys, great to see you again. I'm here, Gabriel, with Alexander.
Hey guys.
We're gonna do a quick case study on the awesome Woodturning 3D, and after that, a classic Q&A session with Alexander. All right, let's kick it off. So the story behind Woodturning is quite interesting. Misha, which is a solo dev, came up with a great concept, and was a question and a story about how our team could help him both keep the CPI very low, better the game quality, and reach the charts with a very short timeline. So first of all, the concept. Misha sent me this video explaining to me this was the inspiration for Woodturning. It's both quite an interesting craft, quite mesmerizing, and the way he did it is to pick 3 different moments in the woodturning process. So from this video, which is both satisfying and quite precise, he came up with 3 phases. The first one, which is the actual carving of a wood turner. The second one, which is the sponge, which is actually very satisfying to watch the surface become very light and lisse, soft. And the final part, which is painting. Here's a quick timeline of the actual launch. So we can see that we were able, within 10 days, to actually better the game, transfer it to our account, and make it #1 in the store within less than a month. So we get the question very often, how long does it take from the actual prototype to a launch? It can be as short as that. How so? Well, we have quite a few teams to help. So first of all, the publishing managers, that's our team. Secondly, the launch ops, which helps integrate the Voodoo sauce, correct a few bugs, add content, check and A/B test things. And finally, the marketing devs, which allow, with quite a few ingenious techniques, to keep the CPI low. And within 23 days, we were top in the charts. The first prototype was already incredible. 4 cents, this practically never happens. 50 day one. Remember, the prototype only had 14 levels, and this is something we recommend very often. Quick prototype, a few levels, even less sometimes, track the progression, and you'll be able to have a D1 and measure if this is an interesting prototype. In this case, it clearly was something extremely exceptional. Secondly, I think the great newness from this prototype is the layered steps you can get. This allows the player to get more and more engaged with the actual game. So the first one, which is to carve in a quite, I'd say, crude way, the log. Secondly, the polishing. And finally, the paint. Yet the score is really calculated only on the first phase. It's really about engaging the player into an action that gets more and more precise. Secondly, the choice of tools. On every step, the player gets to choose from different chisels, different sizes of sponge, and different colors. This allows the player, no matter what he does, to get a different result every time, and therefore get a really highly replayable and satisfying game. And finally, I think one of the very special things about this game is how precise you can be. You'll see with pottery, for example, the precision wasn't really there. I think this is also due to the controls. In this case, the fact the tools actually offset your action allows you to have clear visibility on what you're actually carving into. A quick fix for the version 2 was simply to add levels, add the zoning in the background, and haptic feedback, and that was enough to get absolutely incredible stats. 4 cent CPI, which of course, now that it's in the top charts, has multiplied, over 50 D1, 16 D7, and 23 minutes playtime. Now, as to the game you currently see on the store, it was really a question of A/B testing finding new features and new elements to add into the game. So we actually leveraged the fact that there were quite a few steps in the game to add a fourth one, which is the stencil. We've noticed that the painting wasn't allowing the player to be as precise as he wanted to be, and adding a fourth step, which is the stencil remover, was both satisfying, close to the core of the game, and people seemed to really enjoy it. Another quick precision we added was to add 10% to the score, which used to be very difficult. In order to make it more forgiving, we added 10% to the score of each player. Therefore, anyone who had above 90% would actually get 100 to his score. The easier perfect is something we've A/B tested. This is again linked to forgiveness. There's actually a bit more resistance when you get in the core of the wood you're not supposed to cut. People were really enjoying that feature. Finally, a quick fix in controls. And our team, and especially Misha, who's worked a lot on this game, are working on shops, more content, including new paints, new stencils, and many new features to come. So to wrap up, I think this is a really great story from a solo dev, just like Lawson, for example, who made an incredible game from a very new idea. Our team that was able to help him push his game into the charts and create this really great hit that we know today. That's it for today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gabriel.
Welcome.
And yeah, and a really inspiring story. Just to look at the timeline in the second slide there is super impressive. Obviously, it shouldn't be discouraging to anyone, I think, because don't forget this is rare, as Gabriel said. It's not the default. Like a month to publishing is relatively rare. It's something that we're focused on maybe a bit more today than we were, say, a year ago, because we've been able to really speed up our execution as a publisher, but also our studios, partly as a result of adapting to a new market. It's a market where things change very quickly, where clones can emerge very quickly as well. And we're really proud, I think, I speak for Gabriel, for Misha, for the team, really proud to be able to make sure that games like Woodturning are very profitable for the studio, obviously for the publisher, and it helps us put more and more capabilities behind these types of games to make sure that original ideas have a life of their own and are protected and are able to really get the distribution they deserve. So yeah.
Just to add to that, Misha is a very hard worker, fast prototyper, extremely fast, one of the fastest we've seen. He's been working very closely with the launch ops. Everybody's impressed both with the speed at which he works and the quality of his work, and I think it's a great example of a solo dev that's very dedicated to what he does. And he's studying on the side too, so it's incredible. And congrats to him.
Yeah, congrats to Misha, congrats to the Launch Ops team as well. So it's a team that really has been built to help you launch games faster, focus on the right things at the right time, so that we also take a lot of the work off of your hands, so that you can focus on the core gameplay and some of the great features that you've always wanted to build. And we might focus on different areas of the game that can also help drive higher retention, and higher LTV in your games. So yeah, congrats to the broad team. I think it'd be great to take some of your questions, either on Woodturning or on any other topic that you might have. So yeah, just starting from the top, maybe looking at just looking at Juice Boy. For example, good question. Does it mean simulation is still trending? I think I'll take that one. I think it touches on two topics. One is around simulation, crafting, ASMR type games, and the other question is more on trends and what's hot right now. So on the first question, I think there's one thing to focus on, and that's maybe one of the first couple of slides of Gabriel's presentation, which is what is creating the uniqueness, the satisfying, the precision in Woodturning that you didn't have in a game, even like Pottery, which was maybe one of the first such simulation games last year by Exordium, who did an awesome job at finding a new satisfying gameplay. And so yes, both were simulation. There were a few others with competing games like IPO Good, Icing on the Cake, and all these simulation games. And the answer is that trend is appealing because it's instantly relatable. You can watch a video of a simulation game and there is no need for an explanation because it's a real life kind of event that you can easily engage with. And so they will very frequently be, I think, low CPI games for sure. And Woodturning is a great example of that. What's tough is to find the edge on other such simulation games that will really take your game and bring it out of the fray. And that's, in this case, precision, but also this kind of, as Gabriel said, this kind of layered gameplay where step one, you cut things with a lot of precision, as much as you want, but a lot of precision. Step two, you then mold it with the smoothness of a sponge. Step three, you graffiti and you make it your own. And kind of this layered gameplay, I think, is one of the big strengths of Woodturning. And it means that there was a fresh kind of a second wind for simulation through Woodturning if you compare it to other simulation games at the beginning of the year. And then the second question that I'll take quickly also is kind of what's trending right now. A broader question, which is a really good one. I think you've seen recently some emergence of fantasy type games, which were maybe more, in the past, lended themselves more to casual games generally. And we're seeing more and more of those in hyper casual. So if you take, Ink. Ink was a good example of it. Recently there's been, other games like, there's the ID Please game, which is more of a kind of Tinder-like swipe, but the story is there and you're a bouncer. There's a dentist game that has made it to the top charts as well recently. So those stories are all easy to understand and relate to, and you kind of, as a player, put yourself in the position of the avatar, and you feel like you're playing a role that is taking you out of maybe your ordinary life, even if it's only for 2 or 3 minutes per session. But those are interesting games. It's a very recent trend, so worth considering, I think, as you're looking for your next games.
Quick question, thanks. Quick question from Blogger Web. Does the CPI remain the same for Woodturning when Voodoo scaled the game? Obviously not for quite a few different mechanical. How could I say? Basically, as you scale the game, you'll buy more users, so mechanically, the CPI will get higher and higher. That's also why we have the marketing devs who make sure to add some twists to the gameplay, whether it be in the Unity project, changing a few assets, the camera, the filters. So it has multiplied quite a few times, but it's still quite stable. Another quick point about how that CPI could be so low, I think it's due to the promise of what you see, which is Woodturning, and what you get, which is hyper-realistic simulation. And I think that's what breaks apart Woodturning from Pottery, from possibly other simulation games, is the fact that what you see and what you predict you will do will have exactly the effect as you would in real life. And that's the real difference with Woodturning.
Very cool. So we're getting a lot of questions on levels, so I kind of want to deep dive in that very quickly. Remember, a game like Aquapark had only a couple levels, like three levels, 3 worlds, and then looped those levels, and you had a very strong day 7, or a relatively strong day 7 pre-launch. And that's true of Woodturning as well, in a sense, given the number of levels. Really, I mean, hyper-casual is a lot about the core mechanic and whether it's satisfying, whether it's repeatable, whether there's depth in it. So you're taking some risk-reward choices. There are different choices in general that you're making in the game, whether it's taking a shortcut, focusing on the part of the gameplay that you enjoy the most to the detriment of another. And these are really the strengths and the drivers of long-term retention in hyper-casual. And that includes simulation, I think. So sure, level design, new mechanics, and you mentioned Pokeball. Pokeball is a great example of a game where we introduced new mechanics in the levels. It's procedural, so there were unlimited levels at any given point, but adding new mechanics and new discovery was great for day 7. But still, if your core is strong, these are the types of day 7s that you should be looking at before optimizing.
I'll take a question from QUUUMK. How is it possible to estimate user retention with only 14 levels? How many levels does a game need to succeed at testing? So this is a question we get frequently. The best is to test only maybe 5, 6, 7 levels and then loop them. But most importantly, track the level progression. So by looping and by actually, so you'll basically set an infinite number of levels that repeat each other. But if you track them correctly, you'll know where the drop-off is. And from there, you'll actually get a very nice D1. You won't really be able to project a D7, but you know that by adding more content, logically, you'll get a better D7.
Yeah, exactly. Through the GA level tracker, which is on Zendesk right now, through the dashboard, we've put a few instructions on how to track levels and how to interpret data. And if you have a 3-4% drop-off per level for 10-15 levels, or even fewer, even if it's 5 levels, but you see there's a smooth and narrow churn rate between each level, then you know, okay, this game has potential. It's worth my time to invest in building 15 additional levels. I'm not just building something that is empty. I'm building off a strong foundation. So yeah. So just to look at some of these questions, I think we had one question on originality and on building original gameplays. So it's a good question when you look at Woodturning and you compare it to other simulation games, though we covered some of that earlier on and what makes Woodturning different. If you take another example of a game like Draw Climber, which is recently top charting game, and will very likely to present that game in a separate live stream. If you compare that game to Draw Car, for example, the differences are fairly minor in terms of, you would think, in terms of CPI, in terms of the story, in terms of the gameplay, which is drawing something that materializes and shapes the avatar, and then it has an impact on the outcome of a race. Well, in fact, there are differences there, which we'll cover in a separate live stream. But so even though this theme is similar, even though the gameplay is similar, sometimes different features or a different twist on a game can have a massive impact. And there is room for gameplays and themes that have similarity, so long as the game feeling and the impact on the core mechanic is different. So don't shy away from inspiring yourselves from top charting games, especially if they're older top charting games. If you think that you have an edge or a pivot or a difference that will have a big impact on the game feeling.
Okay, let's look at another one. How much does ad video affect CPI? How much does ad video quality affect CPI? Really not much, as long as you can really see what's going on, what are the controls, what's a win, what's a lose, who's the avatar, what's the background, you're good. I would just recommend using our cropping tool, so make sure it's 4:5, no blurry edges, no black lines, because that will affect CPI. In terms of quality, I think, just making sure you can really capture what is the core, what is the game, you're good to go.
Awesome. We are taking questions one by one here. A lot of questions on Woodturning, obviously. Okay, would it make a difference on day 1 retention, building a game with only 5 levels or looping them, from Axios Games? I think we've covered that. Sorry, I'm trying to make sense out of this question, but it's, I think it was covered quite well actually by Gabriel. Did we cover the gender split question?
Nope. I think, so that's a question from B-Boy Lawson. Hey there. I think it's quite a masculine game. I can't remember exactly. I think it's 70% plus masculine, just because of this kind of, being in a shop. It's a kind of a masculine hobby. I think there's quite a big margin to find a similar gameplay with some sort of pivot for females. I think there's something to explore there. Women still play, but it's true it's quite a masculine game. And you were talking about innovation. Pottery is about a year old. So there is this sort of kind of cycle. Of course, there's no point in competing with an already top chart game. But I think there was kind of a problem that was fixed in Woodturning, in Pottery, that works in Woodturning, is the fact that he changed the position of the log from this to this, which means you actually have to cut moving forwards with a vertical tool. And you can actually be much more precise. And I think that's a pretty cool innovation. So if you can think of some kind of, I'd say, crafting more than simulation game that has another control, some kind of pivot in the actual input, I think that could be a win.
Awesome. So just looking at time and the questions we've got left. So still a lot of questions on CPI and retention on Woodturning. Feel free, we're going to take one of these questions, but while you're thinking about your next questions, feel free to open it up and broaden the questions to product generally, not necessarily just Woodturning or more of the technical things, but maybe more on product. And to give you an example of trend or maybe of a learning that we've seen recently, and I think this was shared through the newsletters as well, the notion of, I think, reward within the game is an interesting new kind of feature that we've tested across a couple of games, and that has been quite successful. So if you look at a game like Pokeball, if you look at a game from Lawson, who did an awesome job, or if you look at a game like Bikes Hill as well, play those games and maybe play them to the end of each level and take a look at the end of level mechanic and the way the reward system is kind of integrated into the gameplay. So it's your skill in the main gameplay will determine the outcome and the reward you get at the end of the level. But there is a randomness, there's a random factor that is quite strong, and those are learnings we've taken and we've backed with data. And so we can comfortably say if you're able to integrate a measure of randomness in the reward that you get, when that reward is linked to performance, that can have quite a strong impact on retention on your games.
Quick question from Trevor Martin. Can you tell us more about A/B testing efficiency on Woodturning? But might as well expand that question to all the games that we launch. A/B testing is quite efficient. We will not push a feature in a live game, especially not if there's a bunch of users in there, if we can't A/B test first. So the way we do that is using Mixpanel or separate different cohorts. In the case of Woodturning, it's been quite efficient. That's how we added the stencil. We weren't going to push it live. What if people don't enjoy it? So it's more than efficient, it's necessary, because you can't really take that kind of risk on a live game. Every game that we have live has been A/B tested, or for our top game is still being A/B tested.
I just want to take a question, because once again, it addresses the trend question from Tonio. Can I build a runner even though the trend is on simulation? I would say watch out when you say that there is one trend. There isn't. Oftentimes there will be similar games in the top charts. That's partly because of inspiration from the top charts. It doesn't mean that users suddenly only want simulation games. It just means that more often developers see simulation games, so they'll start creating more and more of these. And there is always something to be said about freshness, newness, and starting a trend rather than following it. And so, yeah, maybe the runner trend is a little bit behind right now. That's to be demonstrated. But definitely, if you have a good runner idea, if it's deep and if it's a fresh new idea, go for it. I mean, it's a great time when you're against the market to be releasing a game.
I'll just take a question from a Russian developer I can't pronounce. Does infinite gameplay instead of leveling system still work? I wouldn't recommend going with endless runners, for example. Just it goes back to our basic guideline of snackability. So when you open a game, or at least the player will expect to have a quick break of maybe 30, 40 seconds. If he's going for an infinite runner, he may be stuck there for a few minutes. So it helps the player kind of know what to expect when he first opens the game. Secondly, you can add zoning, you can show different mechanics, different worlds, different zoning to the player. And of course, later for a live game, that's kind of where you manage to put a full screen out, of course.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm going to take a question also from Vismay Agrawal. which is a question we saw probably beginning of last year as well. And the question is, do you think that 2D games can make a comeback? It's a good question. In a way, there have been a few successes in this space. The difference is that they're not like pure 2D, like Snake versus Block, totally flat. Generally, the assets will be 3D, or there'll be some sort of 3D effects or feel in the game. If I take a game like Dig It, the gameplay is 2D. I mean, you need to have the full visible field and interact with it, and 2D lends itself to that type of gameplay. But you know, you're obviously digging with some sense of 3D. You're digging a hole with perspective in the sand, and then this 3D ball is obviously going from one end to the other end of the level in a smart puzzle. But fundamentally, it is a 2D game. And if we take a more recent game like 2048 Balls 3D, despite the title, when you play it, it very much feels like a 2D game. In fact, some of the early visuals were much more 2D than the way we brought them out. But the truth is, if you want to design a hyper-casual game that is successful and marketable, you're going to want to have some 3D component, something that kind of pops out of the screen, no matter what the gameplay is. And it's kind of faking it. I mean, it's 2.5D. But that has an important impact. So yes, the gameplays are still very much doable. They have been done in 2019, but do try to get as much of that polished art and interesting physics as you can in those types of games.
I'll just take a question from Tagadatri. Does this mean satisfying videos are back for ideation? I wouldn't recommend at least basing a whole gameplay on a satisfying GIF. The problem is you might be stuck with a low CPI, but also a low retention. So really think through how you can develop both, a satisfying core and adding an element of choice, of depth, of actual real gameplay into it. So, just a kind of, I'd say like a basic tap timing game, if it's satisfying, will not get you a proper D7. So they're back. I don't think they're particularly back. It's all right to take those as inspiration, but you need to strap a very solid core game loop in there.
Cool. I think, Gabriel might take a last question after this. I just wanted to close up a little bit just by maybe recapping on the market currently. We've done quite a few launches recently in January. It's, we think, a fantastic time to be developing and to be releasing games, and you guys have been amazing at it. Obviously, it's hard, it always is, but it is a good market. The CPIs are fairly low. We're so optimistic for the beginning of the year. If I'm looking back 6 months maybe, where the market was challenging, the tools were a bit broken, Facebook across the board, and it felt like everyone was competing in the same small segment. Things are definitely loosening up. We're seeing more and more hyper-casual in the top charts, and it's been a great period for us. We just want to make sure that we are able to share that success with as many studios as possible, and we're really seeing that pick up. So I just want to say, congrats to all the studios as well that have been releasing games and testing really awesome games on our dashboard.
All right, cool. I think that's it.
Awesome.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time, guys, for another case study.